This time on Poll Hub, our news survey with NPR and the PBS NewsHour dives deep into how Americans are thinking about race relations. There's a lot here to discuss, and we will do so. Then catching up on COVID. Restrictions are easing, but what do Americans think about rules that may now be put in place based on whether you're vaccinated or not? And then we go way back, 1965, way back for some of us, for Lee's fun fact. Stick with us. This is going to be a good one. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marengoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We've mentioned on this podcast before that we have interns we work with and students we work with that help us put this podcast together and also get some of our poll information out, especially around the social media. And working with some of the interns this week on this poll, about race relations, a word came up and I couldn't say, no, we shouldn't use that because it's fair. They described this poll as bleak in terms of the way that Americans are responding to where we are with race relations. And I think, sadly, I think that's fair. Is that an unfair characterization, do you think?
No, I think that's actually right on. 42% of Americans say race relations in the U.S. are actually worse than they were a year ago. 39% believe race relations are about the same. But interestingly, we do a follow-up question to those people who say remain the same. We ask them, do you think that's a good thing that it stayed the same or not? And many people say no, it's not. It's actually a bad thing that things have remained the same. And 17% say that race relations have gotten better in the past year. Now, these numbers are pretty stark, are pretty bleak. Interestingly, though, one point that I think we do also needs to be made is that this is the lowest proportion of people who said that things are getting worse in the last six years, since 2015. And those who say that race relations are getting better, that proportion is actually up 9% since 2017. So absolutely, things are not good. Things are bleak overall, but we did find a change in the numbers.
Now, let me try to go with the glass being a little bit more on the
half
full side than on the half empty side. We had when we do these polls with NPR and PBS, we usually have moderately detailed discussions about some of the findings. And on this one, we got into exactly this discussion, and it was probably the longest discussion we'd had with the folks down there because there was a question as to, is this an optimism or a pessimistic poll? And I think that there were things that make it bleak, and there are also some statistics which Barb just referenced, which make it less pessimistic if we don't want to go all the way to optimistic. I found that there was some sense in the numbers that Black Americans think that there's a chance for improvement during the Biden years, and in the long run, most people, regardless of their race, think the nation will kind of get a handle on this issue, at least in future generations. And that may just be the optimistic spirit of Americans, and it may not have a lot to do with race relations per se, but that is what we asked them. So I thought that was interesting. I also found, and this is one point of contention we had in discussing this with the NPR and PBS folks. I thought that the agreement over the murder conviction of Derek Chauvin was interesting in that a lot of whites also thought he was guilty and agreed with the conviction. And I'm not sure that's, not sure that's a change. I don't know if we can talk about that in any optimistic terms because it was a horrendous situation. But the reaction, I thought, from Americans, I thought was a little bit different than we've seen in other cases, going back to Rodney King, which was a real race divider. O.J. Simpson, a huge case in terms of the attention it got. So I thought that was interesting that there was
Yeah,
a little bit
let
more on
me
that.
pick up
Yeah,
on that,
okay.
Lee, because I look, I'll be half full on this one for sure. 77% of adults that we talked to said it was the right decision that in that case. You can look at it in a partisan way as well as a racial way. Partisan, 95% of Democrats thought, but 52% of Republicans thought it was the right decision versus 33% who didn't. I mean, that stands out to me because everything, goes through this partisan lens. And again, as you point out, 74% of whites and 89% of blacks, 79% of Latinos thought that this was the right decision. Again, I love pointing out where we actually have some agreement because so many of our polls are about how we have these stark disagreements based on a variety of different factors. And here, in this case, and again, a horrible case, and it's sad that we're agreeing that a guy should have been convicted, that there's a murder conviction, it's sad that that's what this is about. But I do think that that is a hopeful sign that we have an agreement on a case that is such a lightning rod that sparked the protests last summer in many cases. And I think that is hopeful.
Yeah, and people are saying, and pardon, sorry, I jumped there, but people are saying that, well, it's because we had all that, visual, confirmation of what went on. Well, we had a lot about what went on in the Capitol in January 6th, and, people are telling me not to believe my own eyes right now. So, all right, Barb, jump back in.
Well, I mean, yes, I do see the partisan divide, but there's clearly a racial divide that we see here as well, in not only in perceptions but also in real experience. And so, we didn't really just talk about how people feel about race relations, and we also tapped into some of the issues with police and police reform. But I think what's very stark here is the fact that you have a very clear and different experience, depending upon whether you're white or a person of color in this country. And the fact that there is this undercurrent of denial of this experience and of this difference, I think just adds to a lot of the the differences and divides that we see going on in a variety of different policy areas. We asked about trust here in police, and although there is a good amount of trust across the board, because we do have a consensus to the degree that 77% believe that the police protect them from crime, 72% believe that the local police do have the trust of residents in the community, and 78% of Americans have a great deal or fair amount of confidence in their local police. But once you step down just one notch in terms of race and ethnicity, these perceptions are very very different, and there's a lot more caution. There's I won't go as far as to say as there's distrust, because the way that we phrased the question, we phrased it in the positive, and people responded that way. But there's a lot of work to be done there. Yes, it's a partisan divide, but our partisanship also tends to coincide, with the color of our skin. So I think
that's most starkly shown in the question, thinking about the community where you live and work. Do you think local police treat people of color more harshly, less harshly, or just as they do people who are white? And it's a night and day distinction. Whites in the poll, 25% said more harshly, but 60% said they treat people of color just as they treat people who are white. Blacks, 61% said more harshly, 25%. It's a perfect mirror image. 25% say just as people who are white. That really stood out to me as a case where, okay, people of all races and various people feel, yep, the police in my community are on my side in these things in some majority in every case. But then when you say, but do they treat people of color differently? It's just night and day.
And the experience here is different too. And we asked a question about whether Americans feel that they have personally experienced discrimination or inequality because of their race or ethnicity. And 69% of Americans said they rarely or have never personally had that kind of experience. But then when we look across culture, it's very, very different. 84% of whites say they have rarely or never experienced discrimination or inequality because of their race or ethnicity. 61% of Black Americans have experienced this. 25% saying often, and 36% saying sometimes. So we talk a lot about, and I think social media also fosters this kind of discussion where everybody is talking about, well, the way I see things, the way I experience something. And I think we need to kind of pull that lens back, so that we are also listening and not just speaking about what we see in our own lives.
Yeah, I think there's one other dimension here, which I think the poll got into, and it's the issue that I guess I care very strongly about, because it affects the democracy and it affects all our safety. And that was the issue of whether Americans agree with President Biden talking about white supremacy as the country's most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. And, this issue doesn't go away clearly with a verdict or a conviction or a declaration of somebody's innocence. We're going to have lots of more stuff. And I alluded earlier to, the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. And, I don't know what the summer is going to bring. I hope it doesn't get us back into, you talked earlier about a long time back in the 60s. Well, we had a lot of kind of like outbreaks of violence. There's still a lot simmering here. And there's a lot of, white supremacists who, are not going to be comfortable with some of the direction the Biden administration is going to try to move the country in. And on that, you talked about mirror image, Jay. 84% of Democrats agree that that is white supremacy here is our terrorist threat, and 88% of Republicans disagree. So there's your mirror image again. But I can't help but be concerned about this. What is going on what is simmering here under the surface, which is just ready to come out again with a Black Lives Matter for and against, and some outbreaks of domestic terrorism. I mean, I don't think we've addressed this at all, and there's certainly a lot of guns around, and I think it's a fearful issue.
I guess we're back to the glass half full again, then, or half empty. Sorry, whatever. Yeah, you emptied the glass. Thanks.
Yeah, I just emptied the glass. I emptied the glass there.
You sure did, and certainly the we have also seen other people of color targeted because of their ethnicity.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, if you do want to harken back to that leak that the students described it in the beginning, as you pointed out, Jay, we do see that people have more confidence, or more people, I should say, have confidence in President Biden than they did this time in President Trump. 35% expect race relations to get better under President Biden, whereas a majority of people thought race relations were going to get worse under Trump. But again, when you look at the remain the same and that not being a good thing, that actually minimizes those differences.
So, Barb, we also asked about COVID, right, and the vaccinations, and what are we seeing here? It seems to be aligning with what we're seeing nationally in terms of restrictions being listed in the CDC, all of that. What did we find?
Well, 59% of Americans report that they have already received a coronavirus vaccine. Now, remember, I say Americans, but I'm talking about adults. We interview people 18 plus. We didn't ask about younger people in households. And certainly there are restrictions as to who can get vaccinated. So the 59% does correlate pretty closely with what the numbers that we're seeing nationally that are being reported of those people who have gotten at least one shot of the vaccine. And I say at least one shot because, you know, we've heard also in the news many times that there is a group of people who have gotten one shot. Many are still expecting to get their second shot, but we have 8% of Americans, so 8%, which is included in that 59%, who have only gotten one shot. Some of whom do expect to get the second shot, others that don't. But I thought what was really interesting this time is in April, we asked a similar question. 57% of American adults in the United States had gotten at least one shot of the vaccine. So, which means that over the past month, where we have been seeing these enormous jumps from month to month of people getting vaccinated, from April to May, we've seen a much, much smaller proportion of people now getting vaccines. In a sense, we have more supply than demand for the vaccines themselves. And I think that really gets at the issue of the CDC changing requirements because they want to be able to encourage people to get the vaccine, since we've seen that things have really slowed. The proportion of people getting only one shot has increased, and the proportion of people being fully vaccinated, you know, really hasn't grown as it did initially.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in this. Obviously, this is an issue that cut across the entire nation and the entire world. And I thought it was, you know, uplifting to see that 84% of people we surveyed around the country think it's a good idea that we help out other countries who are, you know, hot right now. Obviously, in
Yeah,
India.
that was big. That really
Yeah,
surprised
so
me.
the our isolationist bent certainly doesn't apply when it comes to that aspect.
That includes almost 3/4 of
Yeah,
Republicans
yeah. So
too. Ship extra vaccines overseas. I was
yeah,
stunned
I
by
thought
that.
that, and I thought that was a nice, you know, a nice topic. And part of it has to do with what Barb was talking about. Also, you know, things are better here than they've been. I can't help but worry about a little bit whether we're relaxing things a little too much, too fast. Are we going? You know, is this a little too soon to be totally coming undone with a lot of these restrictions? And we saw lots of people. You know, and Barb, I wanted to give you the benefit of this because you love when something is 100% or 0% in a poll. And we had, what do we have in here? Democrats report wearing a mask either in most places or even if it is not required. And you got a big 100% on that. When else do you get one? I can't remember another.
No. Statistically, you don't get 100 and 0 because it's an estimate. So you gotta get a few, you know, a few people one way or the other. But no, you can really see the partisan divide when it comes to mask wearing. I mean, I think this whole public health issue has been politicized from, you know, whether the virus was real to whether you get a vaccine to whether now, you know, do we have proof that you've had the vaccine, and then of course the issue of mask wearing, and as I mentioned, I think the motivation for the CDC to remove some of the limitations of mask wearings is first that there are certainly, if there are people who are vaccinated, the risk is considerably less, but also to have some kind of incentive for people to be able to continue to get vaccine, because that has really waned.
Yeah.
I do think the story going forward here for the next month or two, though, is this notion of certain states or certain companies or industries requiring proof of vaccination for some things, and that not happening in other places. And who do you know walking down the street? Well, I don't have to wear a mask anymore. Well, not if you're vaccinated, but how do you know they're vaccinated? This is bubbling right now, and I have a feeling we're going to be asking questions about this
No
on
doubt.
future polls.
And the other, and we'll move on to my fun fact very soon, but the other point on this is that we're hearing a lot about the vaccine. How long is it going to last? And just as a word of caution, so nothing gets mischaracterized, when you hear that it lasts 6 months, it's only because they know right now that it lasts 6 months. The 6 month figure may be a goalpost that's moving, and in a year we may be saying it's still okay. So the notion that it's only 6 months is not accurate. It is 6 months
It's
plus.
at least It's at least
Yes.
6 months, because that's the time that it has been measured since vaccines have been broadly, publicly available. But Lee, on a lighter note, you
I have
have
no segue
another.
here. I have no segue.
Jumping into the Wayback Machine.
So anyway, we the archives dug up for us another Gallup poll from January of 1965. I think at that point, this has to do with televisions in your home. I think I still had the rabbit ears at that point, an antenna on the roof, and the aluminum foil on the.
Did you hold the rabbit ears and then touch your hand to a window so you get a better signal?
Only when it was required to get more accuracy, more precision.
For
So
your
anyway,
giant
the question
things?
Gallup asked, yeah, the ones that weren't blacked out. So the question is, how many television sets do you have in your home? And this is 1965, and I thought this was very interesting. I mean, obviously, TV had become much more universal. 73% said they had at least had one, 20% said they had two, and 4% said they had three TVs in their home. Only 3% said no televisions in their home. Now, we're going to take our own little survey here. Barb, how many you got?
Well, no, that's not fair.
Oh, we're allowed to ask questions? Are you? Well, if you had a guess, what does it mean to you?
Well, you know what? I was a little sneaky, because I did do some follow-up research to find out what things look like right now. And actually, television in households peaked twice, once in 1997 and once in 2001, when only 1.2% of households did not have a television. Another high point, which I found, which I thought was really interesting, you said, Lee, 4% in 1965 said they had 3 or more televisions. Yep. In 2009, the peak of television ownership in households was 44% had 3 or more televisions in their household.
So I know where you're going. I know where you're going on this. You're just your average American.
But the thing is, we're actually now on the downward side of this curve, because people have other ways of tuning in. And although about 96% of Americans right now are, according to Nielsen, are plugged in some way to get access to television, that's actually on a decline.
Jay, how many you got?
One but I have
And how many monitors?
We have lots of screens. I don't watch TV. We watch TV on the TV very, very rarely. But I mean, screen. It's a better question now going forward is how many screens do you watch video on? And that's going to be in a household, a dozen probably.
Barb's got a delivery a while back, and the TV was so large, the delivery man referred to it as Wisconsin. We call that screen Wisconsin from now. I don't know how many. It's a couple miles.
It's only for football.
Someone punts, and I declare a fair catch because the thing is so real.
Although hockey's fun too, because the puck comes right out.
Anyway,
well, you can see the puck. That's actually the distinction. You can actually see the puck on that monitor.
Well, that's true too.
That's right. So, and that's where we leave it for this week.
That's a wrap on this week's edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Rounding out our team behind the scenes, Casey Schaff, our production supervisor, Amelia Morell, our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman, our trusted editor. Of course, many thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And if you have questions or comments, hit us up on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Check out our online learning academy. The Marist Poll Academy can be found at maristpoll.com. That's where we give you the 101 on polls, methodology, and so much more. Oh, yeah, and it's free. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us, and while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.